Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. How does the United Nations communicate with the media, the general public, and policymakers about its initiatives and programs dealing with peace and security, economic and social development, and human rights? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the United Nations and how it communicates with the public and the policymakers and the media in talking about the various programs that it has. My guest today is an expert in this area. My guest today is Mr. Martin Nesirky. Mr. Martin Nesirky of the United Kingdom is the spokesperson for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Mr. Nesirky previously worked, before coming to the United Nations, worked with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, where he served for more than 3 years as spokesperson and head of press and public information. For more than 2 decades, he worked as an international correspondent and editor for Reuters, working in Moscow, Berlin, The Hague, and Seoul. Martin Nesirky, welcome to today's Global Connection program.
Thanks for having me on the program, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me. Martin, let's jump right into it. What is your role as UN spokesperson? It says a lot, but I'm sure it's broader than that.
Well, it's a bit of a two-way street. In one direction, you have the connection with the media. In other words, as you were saying in the introduction, making sure that the international community, the media, general public know about the work of the United Nations in all its facets, whether it's peace and security, peacekeeping operations, whether it's economic development, sustainable development, climate change, whether it's human rights, press freedom, all of those areas. So speaking to journalists, giving briefings to journalists, making information available through the United Nations website, www.un.org. But this, in the other way, the other part of the street coming in the other direction is making sure that the Secretary General knows what's happening in the world, and particularly how we are going to react to those developments in our relations with the media. So that's why I would say it's a two-way street.
Exactly. Now, one of the services you provide is a noon press briefing. Tell us just briefly about that. How does that operate?
This is something that takes place every weekday at 12 o'clock. It's webcast. It's available also in Manhattan, I believe, on one of the channels, but it's webcast live. And this is an opportunity for journalists in the press corps here to ask questions at a live briefing, and I'm there to take those questions, or one of my colleagues if I'm traveling somewhere with the Secretary General, for example. And those questions could range from in-house questions to do with reform at the United Nations, for example, or it could be with peacekeeping operations, what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or South Sudan. It could be on human rights. Wide range of topics. Difficult to judge each day what's coming in your direction, but of course there are at the moment some key themes that you could anticipate: Syria, Mali, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. So there are some topics that you know, others that you cannot always anticipate. The job is to try to give answers to the best of your ability. If you can't answer right then, try to get the answer as soon as you can.
I know one provision you have on the website, the UN.org, is, it used to be, I'm not sure if it's still there, you go to the left side after you tap in and you go to News Center and you can sign up for a variety of things. First, you can read a verbatim transcript of the noon press briefing. Secondly, you can sign up to get press releases during the course of the day, which really come in handy. And of course, they may run 10 to 12, 14 per day. Another source too, and it's very difficult to keep up with the UN, there's a lot of activity going on up here, hundreds of really major discussions going on every day, but so often never quite gets to the media. Unfortunately, they don't print it. Let's put it like that. It gets to them, but sometimes it just doesn't get printed. But you can also go to unfoundation.org and sign up to get an email update on articles about international issues, the UN, and some of the articles are critical and some are not, so it just depends. Well, let's talk about your boss for a moment, Secretary General, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. He is from Korea, and he has a Master's of Public Administration. I think he's the only Secretary General to have that. How does that tie into his administrative style? What type of administrator is he?
Well, he's hands-on and hands-off. He's hands-on in the sense that he does want to know the detail, and he has great command of detail. But also, he wants to ensure that his immediate staff, senior advisors, under secretaries general, and below that too, he wants to make sure that those people really feel empowered to manage themselves. They, after all, are in charge of very large departments or operations. He wants them to be able to manage in an efficient manner, but he also wants to ensure that he has command of the details. So this is, I don't think, simply down to having a master's in public administration. I think this is also, important though that is, it's from years of experience in public service, more than 3 decades working as a diplomat for the Republic of Korea, South Korea. And then ultimately he was the foreign minister of his country. And this involved not only clearly deep knowledge of international relations, but also management. And he has managed large operations in a very efficient manner. I see that efficiency every day in my dealings with him.
That brings up an interesting point, efficiency, because we've heard a lot about UN reform. It was launched, I guess, by Kofi Annan several years ago, and of course Ban Ki-moon has continued on with the reforming the UN. What are some of the internal and external efficiencies to improve the United Nations, to make it more efficient and more effective, that he's implemented?
Everybody knows that the world at the moment is in the depths of an economic crisis. Money is tight for governments as well as for families and individuals. It's really incumbent, therefore, on the United Nations to make the best use of taxpayers' dollars, pounds, euros. It's really incumbent on the United Nations to work efficiently and transparently so that that money is well spent, and also so that you can see where the money is being spent. So that's part of the reform, looking at transparency, looking at economic efficiencies, budgetary efficiencies. How do you shape and structure a billion-dollar budget to ensure that it's more efficient in reaching the goals that you want to reach, which are dealing with peace and security, economic development, human rights, and the general welfare of mankind and humankind. So that's one area. Another is the staff of the United Nations, crucial to the way that the world's preeminent international organization works. That's the people who work for it. And the Secretary General is keen to encourage them to be able to move so that they can have different experiences, and from those experiences be able to offer even more in the work that they do, and enrich themselves, of course, professionally, in the sense that they learn more, they know more, but they're able to give more. So this is the Secretary General's focus on mobility. And then just looking at the physical structure of the headquarters here in New York, it's undergoing a renovation. A large part of that renovation is completed, but there's still quite a bit to go. This is to make the building more energy efficient, to reduce its carbon footprint, to introduce new technologies that will enable us, including in the media sphere, to tell the story of the United Nations in a more efficient and compelling way.
Now, the situation that it's really interesting to look at the United Nations over the years and how it's progressed from 1945, it was founding in San Francisco, California, to today. And of course, it's a far different organization today than it was obviously back in 1945. But let's talk about the Secretary General and his areas of emphasis. He's now in his second 5-year term, well into his second 5-year term, and he has 5 areas of emphasis. Briefly, what are those 5 areas?
Well, just to focus on a couple of them, I think sustainable development is right there. It's a key priority for the Secretary General and for the United Nations as a whole, for the member states. This is ensuring that when we look at developing the world and improving conditions for people around the world, economic conditions, social conditions, that this is done in a sustainable way. That means tackling climate change. It means social inclusion. It means ensuring that when there is growth, it is sustainable. And what do we mean by that? Green growth can help enormously so that you're making use of renewable energy, for example. And this is going to be really crucial if we want to achieve this key priority of sustainable development, to help encourage and motivate the world's population to move in the right direction together, but ensuring that the planet itself can sustain what we're trying to do. Another area, countries in transition. We've seen in the past 2 or 3 years, countries, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, go through profound changes. Some of them have been relatively peaceful. It doesn't mean that they have achieved everything that they want to achieve, but relatively peaceful. Others have been with bloodshed, and Syria, of course, is the key example that we look at right now. How do we help those countries in transition? This is something that the Secretary General wants to put a focus on. Then another area, just briefly, women and youth. The Secretary General believes, and the international community is supporting this. Women's empowerment is going to be crucial for everything that we do. Women can and should play a tremendous role in not just in economic development, social development, in peace and security, in all areas. That women can and should play an even bigger role. And young people, youth, they also need to make their voices heard, and the Secretary General will be placing even more emphasis on this. He recently appointed a special envoy for youth, a youth envoy. He is a senior advisor, but he's certainly not senior. He's in his late 20s, from Jordan, and a very dynamic individual indeed.
Now, you mentioned sustainable development, which brings in climate change. Of course, we've seen the climate changing. We see that virtually every country has been adversely affected to some degree in all probability. We saw horrendous flooding in Thailand in 2011. Recently in Indonesia, Bangladesh frequently gets flooded almost on an annual basis. We've got a short clip, a short video of this, the Secretary General commenting on this issue of climate change. But let's go to the video, listen to it, and we'll come back and talk about it.
In 2012, storms and severe weather left countries ravaged across the globe. A stark reminder that the threat of climate change is real. Action on climate change was a major topic at the UN's Rio+20 summit in Brazil, where 40,000 people gathered to discuss developmental strategies for the 21st century.
We are on a dangerous road. We cannot continue to burn and consume our ways to prosperity at the expense of world's poor and the global environment. My message to world leaders is clear. Sustainable development is an idea whose time has come.
At the summit, 191 countries agreed on an outcome document called A Future We Want.
Martin, I think that pretty well summarizes really the situation we're confronting. The whole world, all 7 billion people on planet Earth. What role has the United Nations played as far as being somewhat of an epicenter to promote discussion and to bring the key players together? And by key players, I'm talking about the governments, but also non-governmental organizations, the private sector, just a variety of different groups through the conferences that have been held in 92, the Earth Summit in Rio, the recent one, the Sustainable Development Conference, Rio+20 in 2012, and a variety of other conferences. But what role has the UN played and what role can it play to promote this discussion and to eventually, hopefully, work for this grand bargain to deal with this problem?
I think you mentioned the idea of an epicenter. I think as well there is a magnetic force at work. The United Nations has a tremendous convening power to bring together, as you mentioned, not just the member states, the governments, the countries, but also civil society, without whom you cannot get this job done. And increasingly also the private sector. Getting those three strands to work together, that's where the United Nations plays an important role. The Secretary General, as you heard in that clip, believes profoundly that what we need to focus on is sustainable development, because through that you can help to tackle climate change, but in a comprehensive way, not simply focusing on the science, important though that is, but looking at other factors as well, social factors, economic factors, security factors. So the United Nations and the Secretary General in particular has played a role in this, is raising awareness, has put climate change, as you say, in the center, but then acts as a magnetic force to attract the different sectors of society to work on this for the common good.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'll be back in just a moment at this important message. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the United Nations and how it communicates with the public, policymakers, and the media regarding various programs in peace and security, economic and social development, and human rights. My guest today is someone who communicates with all these groups on a regular basis. My guest today is Mr. Martin Nesirky. Mr. Nesirky is the spokesperson for the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations. Martin, we're talking about a wide range of issues. We're talking about climate change. But let's move over to the Millennium Development Goals. We think back to 2000, the majority of the members of the General Assembly met in New York, adopted the 8 Millennium Development Goals, logical, practical, measurable goals to reduce abject poverty by 20%, to promote universal primary school education, empower women, to promote sustainable development, and to reverse the AIDS pandemic, and to reduce infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates. And the last one is to promote cooperative relationships, partnerships. Many of the countries are on track to achieve these goals, or many of the goals. Some will not achieve them, but all countries are working towards them, and they've involved the civil society, the private sector, NGOs, and a variety of other groups. But the deadline was 2015. What is going to happen in 2015 with these Millennium Development Goals? Will they just evaporate, they'll go away, or will we continue them into the future?
Well, certainly not. It's not going to be game over when you get to the 31st of December 2015. As you mentioned, great progress has been made. Strides have been made in different areas, whether it's on reducing abject poverty, whether it's work on trying to ensure that as many primary school-age children do get that primary education which will set them up for the rest of their lives. Great progress has been made, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And even if one was to reach all of those 8 goals in their entirety by the end of 2015, there is still much work to be done, including through looking at sustainable development and the challenges that we still face. Because the world's population is growing, the resources we have are dwindling, the effects of climate change are making themselves felt. So for all of these different reasons and others, it's really crucial to work on what comes after 2015, post 2015. What you're going to see, and that's what government, civil society, and the private sector are working on collectively and in different groupings, sustainable development goals. That's what you're going to see come the 1st of January 2016. This will include trying to pick up those parts of the Millennium Development Goals that have not been fully achieved, carry them over with new goals. Again, they need to be achievable, they need to be realistic, they need to be measurable, they need to be practical, all with the aim of having humankind move in the right direction, but ensuring that the planet that we live on is able to sustain that movement.
Now, some of the goals have been achieved. Millennium Development Goal number 1, even though there's still abject poverty, but primarily due to the economic initiatives of China and India and a few other countries, they've reduced the abject poverty level. They have achieved that. There are a couple where we're really lagging. Millennium Development Goals 4 and 5, I guess it is, to reduce infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates. What can we do in that area to focus attention on it? Because it seems like we have the solutions, we just need to apply them.
Poverty reduction is going to remain crucial for sure, and there will be other areas where the international community will need to continue to focus, and one is indeed in that health area. Child mortality rates do remain alarmingly high in quite a few countries. That needs to be brought down. We need to ensure that children are not dying needlessly of diseases that we know how to treat and know how to prevent, but it's for either the lack of funding or the lack of political will that this is not happening. Same with maternal health. There is no reason for a woman to die in childbirth. We know what needs to be done. It's having the political will to deal with that. There is an initiative, Every Woman, Every Child. This is aimed at trying to boost those lagging Millennium Development Goals to try to ensure that women and children, who after all are the nucleus of a family and the future of humanity, to ensure that they have what they need, which is a healthy start to life, and a healthy mother is ensuring that their children can grow up and lead productive lives in the future.
Now, often at the UN, the deliberations at the UN take quite a bit of time because generally you have 193 countries involved, so it's a very deliberative process. But recently, April 2nd, as I recall, there was a huge bombshell of a vote that took place. It was massive, 153 ayes, 3 nays, and 23 abstentions on a conventional arms treaty bill, which had been debated very acrimoniously for about 7 years. What will that bill do, and why is it important, and how will it help to bring peace and stability to areas that have really undergone some tremendous conflict? We remember the Hutus and the Tutsis back in the mid-90s. There were problems in Rwanda and various other countries. But how will that help to eliminate some of these arms and to bring some stability and peace and tranquility?
Well, the arms trade treaty that you're referring to, it is not a panacea, but is certainly a major breakthrough, because it's something that the international community has sought for many years and now has. And that is a way to regulate, to have some kind of oversight over arms trade, meaning arms exports, conventional arms exports, so that weapons do not fall into the wrong hands if they are exported to other countries. To be really clear, because there is often confusion, it does not relate to domestic arms activities. In other words, in countries where you are allowed to carry weapons, to own weapons, this treaty does not affect that. It's talking about exports, so that weapons do not fall into the wrong hands of terrorist groups, of insurgents in countries where this could cause or compound the misery that people are already enduring.
So there's not a concern, the National Rifle Association in the U.S. should not be concerned it's going to infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of people in the U.S. to bear arms. So it does not apply there.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Well, we're down to about our last minute or so, but let me ask you in closing, as you look over the horizon, we've talked about a lot of the challenges that the UN will have to deal with, but what do you see as one or two of the, or one now major challenge that the UN is going to have to confront as we move well into the 21st century?
Sustainable development is clearly going to be the main priority to deal with that. This is a package deal. It's an arrangement to ensure that our priorities dealing with climate change, economic growth, equitable growth, social inclusion, to ensure that all of those are bound together in a way that will enable the planet to continue to sustain us. And then in the immediate term, some of the areas that we're seeing, Syria, Mali, peacekeeping operations, these are major challenges for this United Nations organization that we work for and seek to promote.
Well, Martin Nesirky, spokesperson for the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on Global Connections Television.